At some point or another in our life, we've had a trauma. We've fallen and hit the ground. We've had a trauma. We've had surgery of some sort. We've had a trauma. We've been sitting at the computer like this for the last 5 years. Each of these things, whether it be a sustained posture, a nasty whack, or a surgery, each of these things change our mechanical, what's tight, our neuromuscular, how our brain sees and uses the body, and then finally our motor control, how efficient can we be used as a whole. One more neuromuscular that I've got to say, and I heard this yesterday. If you're a violinist, left hand's up here picking the strings, right hand's down here using the bow, what do you think happens to the brain of the right side versus the left side? Do you think that there's any difference? What might you expect?
Fine motor control on for your left hand.
Absolutely.
Your right side.
The brain gets larger on those areas. If you map out the representation of, let's say this is the area that controls your two hands, and normally it's, normally if we're dominant in one hand, we'll see a little bit more on that dominant side. Those people that are using the violin, the left has a huge amount more map specificity, if you will. These maps aren't this big, they're that big. So the left hand has so much more space devoted to it than the right hand. Our brain adapts to what we do. I saw a wonderful visual the other day. It was someone sitting there typing at a keyboard, and those keys were coming back up into the brain. In other words, we program our own brains. If we do this a lot, this is the way we're good at moving. If we do this a lot, this is the way we're good at moving. But then we try to stand up, and our brain goes, I'm not as good at doing that. So we start to look like whatever we do. Our mom used to say, don't stick your tongue out, you're going to get stuck that way. And in a way, it's true. You get stuck that way. You get tightnesses. Your brain starts to change in that way for the better and the worse. And our bodies start to get used to moving in that way, even if they have the ability to move differently. So mechanical, think stuck. Neuromuscular, can the brain control it? Does it have that connection with the muscle locally in the core? Does it have appropriate strength and endurance? And then finally, as you think about motor control, it's the global body. What questions have popped up? I want to capture those a little bit at the end, a little bit as we go along. What do you guys have to add in? No?
That was awesome.
Awesome. So, Kate, yes, please.
So, I mean, the idea about like different things sticking together.
Yes, thank you.
Has that been like proven through I mean, how has that been proven?
I could show you quite literally. It's amazing that if you see that fuzz up there that he started to peel one layer back and you saw that kind of white stuff. You will see areas in there, and I can actually, if you email me, I can send you a video where he is pulling the IT band off of the quads, and as he starts to try to lift it up, he can't. And instead of being able to take his finger and separate one layer from another, he has to take the scalpel, or he has to tug on one layer. There's a lot of places in the body as he does this dissection where you'll see that. There is not only this video, but there's a lot of evidence out there in the research.
So does it vary from different dissections though? Like some people.
Oh, absolutely. That's the big picture. Most of the places in our body, they just slide and glide. What happens when we get a trauma, an injury, a surgery, a static position, those things that haven't moved in a while get stuck. So it's absolutely different from one body to the next, and that's the beauty of it. You got to say, where is that knot at? Where are those things stuck at? And then be very specific about how you move them. So there's lots of research out there. In every dissection, you'll find these areas of trauma, injury, where or just people have moved this way their whole life, where things are stuck and not moving. Lots of research. Thank you. Next time I'll actually come with that research outside the video.
Another way to think of it is, where has it been proven? It's proven in your body. I think everybody in the room has had an experience of sitting for a long time. Or when you wake up in the morning, you've had a really long night's sleep, you wake up in the morning and you're stiff. You get up and you're stiff, and you want to stretch, and you stretch. Some of us don't stretch. We just get up and we take the same form all day. Right? But if you move, you start to break up the layers. So have you ever taken Elmer's glue and put it between your fingers and you keep opening enclosing the fingers, it gets stickier and stickier and more tacky, right? It's dehydrating, and hydration plays a key role. The glistening fat that everyone was going, you know, I don't want that in my body, is very important for lubrication of all these different layers of muscle, spindle, fascia, all the interconnections. So, yeah, the proof is in your body. You've all felt stiff, and some of you have stretched before and then felt less stiff. And to reiterate what Curtis said, we get good at what we do. Yeah, so all of us have experienced time on the bike in the saddle, and more time and experience you spent on the bike in the saddle, you get better at it, right? You've had incremental or exponential increases in your ability to ride a bike. So if we sit for most of the day at a desk in front of a keyboard, looking at a monitor with our heads forward of our spine, we get really good at that. We adapt to that. Unfortunately, it's not a good biomechanical position to be in for long periods of time. And if you add that to cycling, it can get even more exacerbated. And so one of the things we're going to talk about later in the presentation is what modalities can you do to help balance that out? Because we're all looking for balance. Somebody else was talking about, you know, how can I be more efficient? How can I get faster? So much of it has to do with being more balanced in your body so you're more efficient. You might be producing an ample amount of power, wattage, but you've got drag. Curtis refers to this as, you know, where are the brakes? Where are you dragging?
And there is some research being done now, presently with actual live humans of separating the muscle layers and how that's going to affect things. So it's hard to study live humans because they can't keep them in a lab case, unfortunately. No, fortunately. But, you know, so there's so many different factors that we've all experienced when something's been released, I can move there, and you no longer have the pain. And so as far as clinically, so far a lot of that has experienced. Peace. So you're done.
With that note, and I want everyone to, I'm going to say it twice and then you guys get to say it with me. The body is cement waiting to harden. Yeah, think about it for a second. The body is cement waiting to harden. So if you are these two layers, skin on fascia, fascia on muscle, and if every day you move in a way that keeps those glistening layers sliding on one another, it's awesome. But if every day that joint is staying with forward shoulder or tight hip flexors, things get glued together. So if the body is cement waiting to harden, the flip side of that coin is good news. Motion is lotion. Yeah.
Move it or lose it.
Move it or lose it. So everyone gets to say it together. The body is cement waiting to harden. Yeah. So think about that each morning, or if you watch a cat or watch a dog, every time they get up from having laid down for 10 or 15 minutes, they stretch, they move, they unlock those joints. So if you're always like this, you're getting hardened like that. I hate to say it. And just sometimes doing this won't do it, because that spot that's stiff, stuck, and hard, it's not loosening up until you get really specific with your exercise, your foam roller. And that spot that's tight, your body's now learned how to move like this, and even if we unlock it, it still has the habit of moving like this. You have to change the coordination and the movement habits. Okay, I'm going to step off.
All right. Thank you, Curtis.
That was wonderful.
So I'm going to go over the most common in cyclists, specifically first mechanical restrictions. Number one is the hip. Okay, cyclists do have to bend a lot at the hip. So the whole back side here has to really open up when you're on the bike, mechanically. So I'm going to use Owen here as our beautiful example.
He is beautiful.
How you might check that. So, just for a minute. Thing.
Oh.
Notice we're not showing this on me at the moment. I've become a little too cement-like in the last month or two.
Good work.
Yeah, I gotta work.
So, yeah, shoes are off. Okay. So, the first main thing is the hamstring. So go ahead and lay on your back, head side to side. Okay. And so hamstring specifically, we would check, go ahead and relax here. With the thigh vertical, and you just relax, let me move you. How far do I straighten his knee before I feel the first resistance? It's about there. Okay, and if he's 20 degrees shy of vertical, that's good for road bike. If he's time telling, he should be way up there. Okay. The other thing generally is hip flexion. Nice hip flexion. Nice and easy. No resistance. I got to do what you're doing.
Oh, we're going to be in your studio.
Yeah. So when we check, does your hip flex? You know, you're from here to here to here all the time on the bike. Does it move freely? First restriction, is it in the front? The front won't fold, the fascia, each layer is the muscle, the quads, the hip flexors, TFL, adductors. Is that what's first stopping your hip from flexing, or is it your glutes, your hamstrings, your adductors? So we'll feel for that, and we'll feel specific restrictions, and often work on those and teach you that that's your first area. So those are things you can try on yourself when you bring your knee up. What's first stopping you from coming in? Cyclists, you should be able to really, thighs should touch the rib cage. Okay?
Without any resistance.
Without any resistance. Whew. Okay. That's a lot to ask. But
I think
so
it's important to note that a lot of folks will get a false sense of flexibility because they're not realizing that, you know, I can bring my knee into my chest, but my pelvis is rocked back.
yeah, you can force it there because something else is going to give.
Same thing on hamstring flexibility, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if I do this and I round my back, wow, that's pretty flexible, right? So that's my back.
If you rock like that, your low back, your pelvis is going to be hurting.
So here's what that looks like. I can fold up my thigh perfectly relative to my hip. Look at how well I do that. Hey, I've got great flexibility here, but as soon as my hip runs out of motion and I can't fold or bend here because I've got tightness in my hamstrings or my glutes, I run out of motion right here, and it sends that motion somewhere else. You see how, boom, run out, run out, run out. And yes, the seat's a little bit low, but that's what happens when we don't have appropriate lengthening in the back or the ability to fold or squish in the front. You end up with one of these guys going.
And then tight hip flexors specifically?
It's mostly what Katie was just talking about, which is the tight back chain of the body. Imagine right now if I had that piece of duct tape running from here up to here, and I started to bend my hip's like, I don't want it to tug on that back here. Well, instead of bending here more, I'm just going to shift over to the side. That makes sense? So it's the ability to link. If I was wearing a pair of jeans right now, and those jeans had an area where they were glued to my skin, and I started to bend up, those jeans said, I'm not going to lengthen, so somebody else better move for me. So the back, side, hamstrings, glutes. Now if I had a softball sitting right here, i.e. hip flexors that didn't want to squish, that could also do it. If I put my fist right here and I came over the top, can you see how that would push me over as well? So muscles have to be able to squish as well as lengthen. But what we're mostly talking about right now is this back chain of muscles and its ability to lengthen. Does that make sense? Can you see that? Great.
Yeah, and there's a test, you were talking about hip flexor stretching, so there's a test we can do for length, but is it mobile within all those layers to fold on itself? It can be really long but not be able to fold on itself. So this is what cyclists use, is those hip flexors to be able to fold on themselves, be loose between each of the layers. There's fascia between every myofibril, every group of fibrils, and around each muscle, within, around, I mean it's everywhere within there, and those can get sticky and stuck. Okay. So, the most common limiter is the hamstring length, glute length, and also, use it or lose it, the hip capsule is made up of ligaments around that ball and socket joint. If you don't go that way, that capsule can get tight on the side it doesn't go. That can cause some impingement in the front. So it'll get tight in the back. So sometimes this actual hip capsule gliding and loosening, that's needed. It's been not going that way for a while. Okay, so
Big picture there, it's a lot better to have a lot of rubber bands around, than whether those be muscles or ligaments as opposed to leather straps or as opposed to steel cables. And the body should be able to, you know, just flop and give and spring as opposed to cement.
okay, so go ahead and get on your hands and knees. So next up the chain of the backside mobility to be on a bike efficiently, well, with mobility, first of all, what we're talking about is the upper back, the thoracic spine. So this is low back, ribs, T1 through T12, the mobility here, okay? So will it extend? So go ahead and sag down here. So we'll check that. Can you extend through there? All the joints on each side of the vertebrae, between each are facet joints, okay? They have to be able to glide open. If they haven't done that, they're pretty stiff, okay? So a lot of us get stuck this way. So the joints between each vertebra. Then there's ribs, the joints between the vertebra and the ribs, and the ribs between each other. All those can get really stuck and sticky if you don't move in different ways, okay? So that's up the chain in the back. And a lot of times upper back stiffness, you do need some mobility there to be real efficient on the bike. It's especially needed so you don't hurt your neck or your low back. We tend to move there more because this is a stiffer area because of the ribs, but if you just move less and less there, if you're real hunched, go ahead and hunch up the upper back. Okay, if you're real hunched up there, think about what the neck has to do to see the road when you're on the bike.
Does it look familiar? Does it look familiar?
Yeah.
Or what the low back has to do. The low back should have a natural inward curve. On the bike, it should at least be flat to keep it safe and happy. All those joints, the disc, the facet joint to the low back. So mobility here is a lot for health of the low back and the neck, but also for efficiency. And where's your scapula? You have that?
And it's like, well, he's got a scapula. It's on his body.
I would take it out of him.
I'm sorry, you came with a scapula?
Oh, always takes a
I've got a
scapula.
bag of bones. I've got skeletons in the closet.
He's got lots of skeletons.
You want to put that on me?
Doing my poor spine.
Actually, yeah, go ahead. So, scapula, his shoulder blade is right here. Okay, this is the right one. He's got a left one, hopefully, too. And then a pelvis. Okay. Right a lot there. Yeah. So the trunk, a lot of cyclists get kind of here down, just focused, right? Well, actually, the trunk needs to function as a unit. The scapula and the pelvis, they work in concert with each other. If this is not moving, your scapula's just gotten stuck and weak and stiff, it's not going to move down here very well. So the complement up and down here, you need movement here for this to be able to muscles work efficiently, all that. Okay?
It's not like we want this on the bike, but if you've seen those cyclists that are just rigid in their pelvis and rigid in their shoulders, that's not efficient either. You want that, if you watch an efficient cyclist, you'll just see this gentle snake-like motion. Goes from the pelvis to the shoulders and back down. I'm hugely exaggerating that motion. But you know what that looks like. When the shoulder blade and when the trunk is working well with the pelvis, there's this wonderful core connection, fluidity. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Runners, walkers, you get a lot of rotation, counter-rotation. So the pelvis and the thoracic spine will counter each other, and then that gives you that spring in runners. You'll see them do that. So cyclists actually need that too. It's much less, but you need some mobility there. Okay, so that's the upper back and shoulder blade control. Okay, so those are the two most common limiters, upper back stiffness and backside hip stiffness or front side hip unable to hold. So next is local control. Can you control your muscles? The core is the local control. Really all movements we've discovered should initiate from your bigger core muscles. If you think about your trunk as a big battleship, okay, this is your battleship, and your limbs are you firing cannons off of that, okay? So you're able to go get this, go push on that, get yourself from here to there. your core could also be a little canoe, okay? Injuries, number two, that's not very efficient. You're having energy thrown here, there, not going forward. So a strong core, initiating from the core, biggest muscles outward through into the smaller muscles is the most efficient way to move, we've discovered. So I'm going to check your core strength. I'm sure it's going to be perfect. So let's go ahead and have you
I'm sure I want to sign up.
lay on your back.
No.
All right. So, core overall, the deep transversus abdominis is our deepest abdominal muscle. It's actually connected to the pelvic floor muscles, lots of muscles on the pelvic floor, and the diaphragm muscle. This whole, it's all a unit connected.
The powerhouse.
The powerhouse. So they'll stabilize your trunk when you do movement. So I'm going to ask him to do a bridge. So go ahead and bend your knees as much as is comfortable, and then lift your hips up. Okay, so this is glute max, your hip extensors, okay, that need to fire in that first part of the cycle. Strengthen those, okay? Now, how is the core doing? Is it holding his trunk stable? Let's go ahead and lift your left leg up. Pedal. Does he drop here, okay? Or does he stay stable in that core? And how long can you hold that? And can you alternate and keep that? So let's go ahead and put this foot down and extend that leg. So, and you watch his pelvis. Does it drop on that side, or is he stable here when he moves his limb? Okay, alternating legs. So that's one core test. So you have the core stability with good firing of strength, endurance, core hip extensors.
My glutes are enduring.
Very well. You can relax them now.
So if he lifted up a leg and he had nice strong quads and very strong glutes, and his legs were those legs were those cannons that were firing really well, and his core was weak or not firing well, what do you think would have happened? Yeah, he tips. So what do you think happens on the bike? You go to push down and then push down on that pedal appropriately. Same thing is true when you go to pull up. If you're clipped in and I go to pull up here and my hip flexors are a lot stronger than my core, all of a sudden my hip flexors pull my pelvis down. The battleship gets rocked and tipped over. So the core has to fire first and become the stable battleship, and you have to have start to lose the ability to hold it for long periods of time. And that pelvic floor gets so tight that they start to have issues with letting it go, and trust me, that causes problems as well. And then the back we talked about before, which is the multifidi and the transverse abdominals run all the way into the back. So you got the front running into the back, the multifidi, top and bottom. That is a beautiful corset, top, bottom, front, and back. And that is a cylinder that has the ability to become nice and stable, become a strong battleship.
What is the multifidi?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, please.
So multifidi are the tiny little muscles that go from vertebra to the next or a couple down. They stabilize locally your vertebra. All up and down. It's like it looks like a little Christmas tree. The deepest, teeny little muscles that are in your spine.
Erector spinae or spinal extensors, right? So if I'm contracting my multifidi, I'm going to be extending my spine. And when I flex, there's a whole bunch of
Popping in your spine, those are turned off. Your pain inhibits muscles. It's one of the horrible reactions of our body, unfortunately, because it's saying you need to rest. It's just this natural reaction. Model of the psoas.
Oh, that's the psoas.
Yeah. So if you don't have all those stabilizers of your spine, your hip flexor starts on your spine, on the transverse processes of L2 down through 5, okay, and then your iliacus blends with that. It will flex your hip, okay, but it also shears your spine, okay. If your foot is planted, it can pull and shear your spine if that's not stable. So any restrictions in that, pulling on things, you want to loosen that bit.
So if he doesn't have a battleship up here, his psoas is a really strong cannon. The psoas pulls. See what happens in his spine? Yeah. Every time he pedals, that psoas is tight or it's firing, you get in trouble.
And usually on the bike, you don't have enough hip motion to do that. So it's just sort of pulling locally, you know, doing little shifts.
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch, ouch. Okay, so I actually think I already talked about the big picture of putting the body in compensations and compensation. So the longer it's been going on, the longer you can expect to take it. But again, any human, we can't stick them in a lab, and I can't just take you and put you in, right. So you never know what's going on with everything else. We try to look at your posture, make sure you're holding things as best you can all throughout the day, you know, decreasing the stresses, and maximizing. So,
It depends.
it depends.
Yeah.
Of the core, initiating those first around to the hip muscles, out from there, and then big picture coordinating the upper with the lower from the core, the scapula and the hip. Okay. So, any questions on any of those things?
And I'd like to do a 5 and do a live demo of that.
Okay.
How long does this re-education process take?
That's a great question.
That is a good question.
When one has been injured for years?
Or we pedal on the bike very unconscious. And I'm not saying you have to be conscious 24/7 or as you're riding all the time, but spending a little bit of time each day saying, oh, every time I step on that right leg, I do this, and I step on the left leg, and wow, that feels stable. Right leg, ooh, okay, there it is. That's much more stable, and that's now equal to it. So the answer is generally waking up pretty quickly, getting connection pretty quickly if it's done correctly, and then a week or two they've changed the way they're moving if they're conscious about it, and then once they're moving in a more efficient way, the brain can connect with those muscles, which can absolutely happen in a week or two. Once the brain is connecting with those muscles and you're using them on a regular basis, then within a month or two they're getting stronger. You have strength and endurance that's building. The trick is once the brain can connect with them and you have the mobility and the coordination, that you have to change habits. 5, because we have a